My late husband started a collection of the oldest biblical manuscripts tracing the history, the development of the written word through time. And I would have to say, in his time, and as it was put on display, and I think a lot of people took it for granted, passed it by just like that. But I had, in my mind, considered that there were, after examining, there were some things we needed to acquire. And there is yet a goal, an unfinished goal in that area, not in the acquisition, but in the putting it out for the general public to see, which yet remains to be determined based on what the Lord puts on my heart. And that's going to be His guidance and His direction. But my late husband began a collection, which I have continued to do. So many what I'll call holes in the collection, which at the first I couldn't think that there would have been any. But over time, what about this and what about that? And things that we didn't ever have the pleasure of procuring for our collection. So part of what makes this ministry stand alone, now I can say that without sounding braggadocious, is that we possess some of the oldest and extant manuscripts in private hands, biblical manuscripts in private hands, tracing the history of the Bible. And so it seems like almost every week I will encounter somebody who will make a reference. This was yesterday on the west side of town, and I had somebody come up and start talking to me and ask me, why do you use the language so much? And I took the time to explain that I don't care what English translation you use. We are using the King James, which was, we'll call it a finished product in 1611, or it's referred to as the 1611. That is a year in time past. But that even our oldest English manuscripts leave us at a quite disadvantage, first of all, because they are so young in their translation. If you go back to the oldest English manuscript that we can find, you're going to be looking at Wycliffe's translation, which we happen to have a copy of, which is very difficult, by the way, to read. It's extremely difficult to even comprehend how somebody could have opened that thing and read what's in there, because it resembles nothing of our English language used today. Now, many people, we all start this way. We start in ignorance. We don't know. So I like my translation because it's so good. Well, what's so good about it? Because it's in English. And I'm not dissing the English language, but I'm simply making a point which, as I said, I'm doing this for the benefit of new people who are joining us and who are listening. Why you'll sometimes see Hebrew, or you'll see Greek, or you'll see Aramaic, or Ethiopic, or Arabic, or any language that will help to unfold what we're doing. And that is because these are languages that are much older, and the manuscripts which we now possess in the English language came from one of those language streams. So wouldn't you go back to the source if you could? That would be my preference. So that's one side of the equation. And then when we talk about English, I must make this reference because people are very confused. I had somebody say to me, well, I like this particular translation. They went on to tell me for 10 minutes why they like it. Listen carefully. Before you decide on what translation you like, it may be well for you to do a little digging into the English language and recognize that it's about the time that Chaucer, that great English poet, really begins to have notoriety, and his writings are being circulated, if you will, but still the language is not yet perfected. And we'll put a bookend somewhere, and we'll say that by the time Shakespeare writes, we've got some polished English. But in between, from the year 1500 to the 1800s, something happened in the English language called the Great Vowel Shift, which made the vowels become shorter and shorter and shorter in their pronunciation, and words that, as I explained last week, became integrated into the English language via these different routes. For example, if you go back to English, the history of Englaland, before it was called England, it was called Englaland. and those 3 tribes that invade. And you fast forward, as I mentioned, I'm just doing a slight review from last week, to William the Conqueror in 1066, who brought with him a certain type of French language into Britain, which became the language spoken of the high court and of the mass populace until about the 14th century, when English returned to its prominence and Latin then kind of took its secondary position and French got the real back seat. So, putting that all in perspective and tracing all of those dynamics, and then compounded by the fact that by the time the Pilgrims arrive here and colonization occurs in America, these are the things you must, if you're going to read anything in English, its value is learn a little bit of the background of the language, and then it'll bring illumination as to why this.
Come to this house.